In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up Auto GPT with Langchain in Node.js. I'm going to cover everything that you need, such as getting API keys, making sure the version of Node that you have is up to date, demonstrating how to install and configure your project. We'll create an Auto GPT instance using OpenAI, and hopefully by the end of it, you have a solid understanding on how you could leverage Auto GPT in Langchain using Node.js. So the first thing that I'm going to have you do is obtain a couple API keys. So for the OpenAI API key, one thing to note with it, you will have some credits that you can leverage without tying in a credit card. So if you just head over to this link here, you'll be able to sign up for an account and get an API key. If you just go to the right hand corner where your initial is, once you've signed up, you'll be able to click that, view API keys, and generate a key. Similarly, go to SERP API. This will be the service that we use to leverage Google in the application. In future videos, I'll cover other ways on how you can navigate the web and make queries similar to SERP. But for this one, we'll be using SERP as it also gives you some free credits that you can use off the bat in your application to get going. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to npm init -y. Now, once we have that, I've already run this. You'll have the package JSON set up. And then once we're in the package JSON, just make sure you make a type module within the package, since we're going to be using imports in this tutorial. Then once we have that set up, go ahead and touch an index.js and a .env. Similarly, I've already run this, so I'm not going to run through this right now. But as soon as you have the index.js set up, just open them up. And in the .env, you'll put in your API keys as you see here. So once you have those set up, we're just going to ensure that our Node version is up to date. So I encourage you just to make sure that you have a recent version to make sure that all the packages are up to date and will work. I'm using Node version 18. So as long as you don't have something like Node version 12 or 14, even 16, I'd encourage you anything over 18 and above, you should be safe. So once we have that, we're going to npm install a couple things. We're going to npm install Langchain off the bat, and then I'm going to revisit this hnsw lib later in the project. So while we have that running through, I'm going to go ahead and just run through some of the imports that we have here. So the majority of what we have that we're leveraging here is from OpenAI. So we're going to leverage the experimental Auto GPT feature. So it is experimental right now. We're going to import a few tools for our file operations. We're going to leverage the Node file store for storing files within Node.js. We're going to use this library to store our vector stores. So if you're not familiar with vector stores, it's how you can create the relatedness between two words. So it's what's being used under the hood to create an efficient way of leveraging something like Auto GPT. Then once we have that, we're going to be using OpenAI as our actual interface LLM that we're going to be interacting with. And then finally from there, we're going to require an import rather .env. So actually just make sure to install .env as well. So once you have those set up, we're just going to head down here and configure our .env. So what this allows us to do is reach into our .env files once they're all saved. So another thing to note, just make sure that once you've pasted in your API keys in the .env, just make sure that the file is saved. So once we have that, we're going to instantiate a Node file store. From there, we're going to go ahead and create a couple tools for file operations and set up our SERP API. So in this one, I'm going to specify that we're going to be using Google. There's also some other things that you can leverage and pass in here, such as passing in your location. If say you wanted to use something like getting weather data, you could do that based on your location there. Then next, we're going to set up the HNSW lib with our OpenAI embeddings. So we're going to store our vectors locally. So what this library allows us to do is create a local version of our vector store rather than having to use a database for it. And then the OpenAI embeddings API is how we create the relatedness within the vector. So a vector is essentially words represented in numbers, and the closer that those numbers are is the closer in the quote relatedness of those numbers. So once we have that set up, we're going to go ahead and create an Auto GPT instance. We're going to specify the model. In this one, we're going to be using OpenAI, like I mentioned. We're going to use our vector store for memory, and then I'm just going to specify a name and a role for the Auto GPT instance that we're going to set up. So I kept it pretty broad. I just called it Developers Digest Assistant, and the AI role is simply Assistant. But you can be more specific if you want in those fields there. So next, I just came up with an example. I said create an index.html file with a working stock chart of Apple stock price using Chart.js with dynamic stock data. Oh, I see, with data, stock data from Google Finance. So I might just pare this back a little bit. I'll just say, instead of dynamic, let's just see if it will get stock data. And then from there, if we go ahead and type in Node index.js and run this, we should get this command where it specifies us to install the hnsw lib-node. So I wanted to show this because often when you do install Langchain, I have noticed that a missing piece is actually remembering to require this library. So it's not necessarily going to be something that you use if, say, you're using an external vector database, but just so you're not freaked out when you see this command, that's just something that you can take from the error and simply paste it in. If you actually copy it, you can just paste it into your terminal here. And I'll just delete this for now, since we had a bit of a false start in our example. And then I'm going to go ahead and run this again. So right off the bat, you see this K4 is greater than the number of elements in the index, setting K to 0. So once you see this message, you'll know that the Auto GPT instance is running as it should, and you'll start to see the output like you might have seen some examples on how Auto GPT runs. So you'll start to have these outputs like thoughts. Okay, I need to create an index HTML with a working stock chart of Apple stock price using Chart.js, etc., etc. It will start to give you the reasoning, its plan, its criticism. So it's pretty interesting just to put in an input and watch this. I'd encourage you to watch this closely, at first at least. Actually, even just in general, in the early phases of this integration, just to make sure that your API key doesn't run off the rails here and you end up in some sort of recursive loop, or it just running for a very long time or much longer than expected. So yeah, just keep an eye on it, but it is pretty interesting if you haven't used it before, just to see how it works. So you see, okay, I need to find a tutorial or documentation on Chart.js and how to get stock data. So, okay, it has the thought, I need to evaluate the source of the tutorial I found and ensure it's reliable. Okay, I need to create an index.html file and add the necessary code. So you see it works pretty quickly. And now the interesting part is I see that I have a write file command. So it's actually written a file within our directory here. We have an index.html, and we'll see I need to test the chart and ensure it's working properly. So I'll just let it go through and see if it finishes here in a reasonable amount of time, and then we'll open it up and see what it looks like. But this is just to give you an idea. So it's less on, okay, is this going to work and give me a perfect working stock chart that's interactive and dynamic and whatnot, but more just to give you an idea on how you could use this. So with a more specific prompt, you could likely have a very impressive result. But the thing to note with this is you can use this to write to files like code, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a TXT file of, say, a summary or a brief like you might have seen in some examples. And you can actually make files such as the code, like I have in this example rather. So actually, instead of waiting here, I'm just going to go ahead and open it to the side here, or rather open it with, let's just open it with Live Server and see what it's given us. Okay, so we see here that we have a stock chart. Now, whether this is accurate or not, I'll sort of leave it up to you to double check. So today's date is April 28th, 2023, and you can let me know if this data is accurate. And if it's not, you can go through the tasks and see, okay, why wasn't it accurate? What sort of prompt might you be able to input in the future to make it more accurate? And yeah, so hopefully you found this useful. If you did, please like, comment, subscribe. I'll have plenty more videos going more into depth into Langchain, into AutoGPT, and the whole AI ecosystem and how it relates to software engineers and web developers. And without further ado, until the next one.